Somewhere in the middle of the night, there was a girl running in a dark forest, crying very hard. She wanted to run away from the castle, away from everyone. Everyone in the castle hated her, her stepmother was always bullying her. She said that the girl was behaving very shamefully, just like her mother. If the girl tried to justify herself, her stepmother would immediately slap her in the face, because she believed that a child could not cross her elders. Somewhere in the forest, the girl remembered how everyone in the castle bullied her. They whispered among themselves and said all sorts of nasty things about her. They talked about how the girl was the illegitimate child of Berg. Her mother was quite a celebrity in the entertainment district. Not a day went by without a scratch on her face. Suddenly, somewhere in the woods, she saw some kind of light. As she got closer, she noticed that the vegetation had dried up. As she got even closer, she saw that there was a fire, and in the center of it lay a large dragon. As she approached him, she saw that his wing was injured. She wanted to help him heal the wound. As she approached, the dragon started growling at her, but the girl was not afraid. She told him that she would do anything to make him feel better. Applying her magic to his body, she used most of her power because the wound was very large. After she healed his wound, she fell asleep from exhaustion. She had never healed such large wounds and used up so much strength. As she fell asleep, the dragon transformed into a handsome man in armor. Sitting beside her, he was surprised at how fearless she was. The girl was still a little conscious and heard a human voice, but still didn't realize who was next to her. Unable to understand who was speaking, the girl fell asleep. And here we see the events that take place 10 years later. This girl has grown up and they want to marry her off to another werewolf. They dyed his hair because this werewolf really liked the golden hair. The maids who dressed up the girl said that the dye was too strong, now her face is a mess. They thought this girl was just a toy for the king. Whispering among themselves, one maid told another that this baron didn't have many concubines left, because he kills them when he gets bored. This girl was sold to the old king as soon as she turned 20. Sadly, the girl said she should have run away that day 10 years ago. But after healing the dragon she had found, she fell asleep and was led back to the castle. The maids who painted her treated her rather roughly. They had to powder her face as Madame had ordered them to do. And then the girl was ready. She was dyed her hair, put on a beautiful necklace and dressed in a beautiful dress. And even when she was painted and dressed, her mother still said she was ugly. That's how much she disliked her stepdaughter. Her stepmother thought the king would be disappointed. She realized that the king knew this girl's mother, so he expected her to be extraordinarily beautiful. She began to be reassured by her son. He had prepared a very large dowry and showed her a chest of gold, diamonds, and diamond. His mother asked him where did he get such riches? The boy proudly replied that he had been told by a dark wizard that there was a pile of gold in the graves at Taiar's border. His mother asked him in horror, did he rob the burial grounds of Taiar's ancestors and come back here? She realized that her son had made a fatal mistake. She started yelling at him and calling him names. If he's shrinking into the Taiar case, then. Before she could finish what she wanted to say, all the castles heard an incredible rumble. Walls and ceilings began to collapse, and no one realized what was happening. The girl looked out the window and saw that dragons were attacking their kingdom. It was the Taiarians. They were smashing everything and making their way closer to the royal family's castle. They honored no one in their path. The most important chief ordered that no one should be left alive. After all, they dared to desecrate Majoruk. One of the knights reported to Her Majesty that the wall has fallen and it seems they want to destroy everyone in the palace. To try and survive, the stepmother ordered surrender and raise the white flag. While the stepmother was giving out orders, the girl wanted to take this chance to escape. She could go to the stone tower in the north and climb over the wall. She should definitely escape from here this time. As she ran to the north tower, the queen, along with the prince and the guards, surrendered to the Taiarians. One of the warriors asked the king what to do with these people. After all, had they raised the white flag? Disdainfully looking at these insignificant people, the king said to hang them all on the wall. When only the duchess and her son were left, the prince fell on his knees and begged for the king's pardon. He promised to return all the treasures, only let him keep his life. The king of the Taiarians found this all very amusing. After all, he had just defiled their Medjugorje Thayer, and now he wanted him to let him live. The king ordered the wall to be burned down and no one to be left alive. To try and survive, the duchess offered to His Majesty to give up her daughter. She told him that her daughter was to be married to the king of the Bryan Empire. She knew that the king of Bryan and the king of Taiar were enemies. She was sure he would be interested if she told him that she was to belong to the king of Bryan. He was interested in the queen's suggestion, so he asked where was her daughter. Looking around, the queen could not find her daughter, and no one had seen her. At this time, she was coming down from a high tower. She knew that all the knights were at the wall, and as long as they were there, she should seize this moment. But suddenly she heard the sound of wind, and in an instant she found herself in the clutches of a dragon. This dragon brought her to the king. When he looked at the girl, he noticed that she had very mysterious eyes, like stars in the night sky. He thought he had seen those eyes before. He remembered that 10 years ago a man with exactly those eyes had not been afraid and had cured him. He knew that when he fell wounded, it wasn't far from this castle. Perhaps this child lived in this castle. But judging by the color of his hair, this is not the girl who saved him, thought the king. The stepmother, to save her life, asked to give her some time to apply her makeup and bring her to His Majesty. She would make sure that her daughter would please him. Putting a spear to the girl's neck, the king gave her a choice. Does she want to be his woman, or does she want to be buried with the others who desecrated the graves of his ancestors? The girl didn't want to die for anything. She agreed to marry the man. Suddenly the man turned to her and asked her what her name was. She replied that she was called Lucina. He realized that in the language of Bryan, this name meant moon. He said that name suited her and introduced himself as King Hakan of Thayer. He promised to treat her well. Since she had agreed to marry him, a priest was needed for a wedding in Bryan. He glanced at one of the captives, who was a priest. He ordered him to perform the ceremony so that he would marry Lucina now. This was very sudden to everyone but the king himself. Even after the wedding, the king needed to witness his marriage to Lucina. The priest asked Hakan to whom he wanted to witness this marriage. He replied that of course he wanted to show it to their king. After the wedding, the priest was to go to the king and tell him that Hakan had taken his bride. 10 years ago, he had sent the dragon slayers, so now he would repay him for what he had done. What a ruthless barbarian he is, thought the duchess. He's using Lucina to get revenge on the king of Bryan. And so the marriage ceremony began. Hakan didn't like that this ceremony didn't look like a wedding. He asked his warriors to pick some flowers for him. He gave a bouquet of flowers to his bride. He knew there was a tradition in her country that the bride should hold flowers in her hands. When she accepted his bouquet, he liked her better. After that, he ordered the priest to begin the ceremony. He recited his prayers and told the newlyweds to seal their vows with a firm kiss to end the ceremony. Hakan took his bride by the waist and pulled her close to him. He looked at her with a very intense gaze before he asked her to close her eyes and kissed her lips. The girl became dizzy and fainted. One of his squad leaders made a joke of his king. Wasn't he supposed to kiss her passionately? How could he make her faint? The king was a little surprised too. Had she fallen from one kiss? He took her in his arms, got on his horse with her, and addressed the people who were still alive. He said he would keep them alive since they had the same bloodline as his wife. But if they dared to touch Taiar's domain again, he would wipe them off the face of the earth. With that, he ordered his warriors to head back home. They mounted their horses and set off, leaving only ruin behind them. In this ruined palace, the queen and the prince were left sitting. The queen said they must bring Lucina back. She sold her to the king of Brian for the sake of her son's future. So she can't just let it go. Well, her son said that all the knights in their castle were dead. The queen didn't want to give up and said they must find mercenaries to help them get Lucina back. The next day, the princess woke up in a carriage of some sort. She looked out the window and saw one of the commanders of King Hakan's detachment. He immediately alerted his king that his wife was awake. Since his wife is awake, they should get something to eat, Hakan thought, and ordered everyone to stop to camp here. After that, the carriage stopped and her spouse got in. He asked the girl how she was feeling. He was surprised that she had fainted so suddenly. The girl, shaking with fear, replied that she was fine. The king thought she hadn't eaten all day and must be hungry. He gave her his hand and asked her to get out of the carriage. But the girl was still embarrassed and said that she was not hungry and would rather sit in the carriage. To which Hakan laughed out loud. He thought it was funny that his wife was very shy. After calming down, he told her that the carriage would be cold at night, so they'd better go outside and warm themselves by the fire. The girl timidly gave him her hand and stepped out of the carriage. One of his servants escorted the king along with his wife to a tent near which a fire had been lit. Hakan praised his servant and asked him to leave the two of them alone. When they sat down by the fire, the man took off his cloak and covered the girl with it. Afterward, he handed her the dinner he had just prepared. In the baron's house, the girl always ate moldy, stale bread. When she took one bite, she was delighted with the flavor. Both the bread and the filling were delicious. She greedily began to eat this bread and stuffing, but the king told her not to hurry because she might choke on it. While she was eating, he poured her some sheep's milk. In the castle, this girl had to run errands all day to get bread crumbs. Could she really eat such a delicious hot meal now? While she was eating, Hakan asked her how old she was. The girl replied that she was only 20 years old. This made him very angry, for she was too young for such an old king. Mercenaries were sent to Taiar to kill the young innocent dragons. In this battle, he lost his brother, who was a great king. If not for the need to ascend the throne to keep the country safe, and even if he had been alone, he would have gotten King Brian's head. That day, had he not been wounded and fallen into the forest, maybe he would have. After his reminiscences, he turned to the girl. Does she regret not being able to be that old man's wife? Without saying a word, the girl shook her head, which meant that she was not upset by this fact. The man understood why she didn't really want to talk to him. After all, he had ordered the purchase of innocent civilians. From her point of view, the king of Brian and him are the same. After a short silence, the girl asked where Taiar was. With this question, she surprised the young warrior. He thought she would cry and ask to go home, but he didn't expect her to be so calm. The man replied that the people of Brian think that Taiar is a land of barbarians, teeming with monsters. But it wasn't. She could see for herself when they got there. The girl has a feeling that living with Hakan will be much better than living in Berg's castle. When they arrived at the palace, she would be able to eat the most delicious food. But the girl didn't understand how the food could be even tastier. Hakan thought she would be picky since she was the daughter of a Brian nobleman, but it turned out she was very cozy with her. She didn't say much because she was scared, but Hakan understood her and tried to reassure her. The girl was scared and didn't know how to act next when Hakan reminded her that they were husband and wife and that the first night of marriage was called the consummation of marriage. She didn't know what that meant, but Hakan explained to her that it meant that they had to spend the night together as husband and wife. The girl was very frightened, but Hakan calmed her down and told her that he would not do anything to her if she did not want to. He said that she could lie down next to him so that she could be comfortable and get a good rest. Hakan started to undress, but the girl got very embarrassed and covered herself with his cloak, saying she would rather go outside. Hakan reminded her that they were husband and wife and that they should spend this night together. As far as he knew, in Brian the first wedding night was called the consummation of marriage. The girl who was in his arms began to cry. This made the man a little angry. He asked this because he really wasn't exactly sure of this information. He said that in Taiar, they spend the night together first and then, if the woman gets pregnant, they have a wedding. Such information shocked the girl. She couldn't imagine how one could not have a wedding but spend the night and get pregnant before marriage. Lowering her to the ground, he started to calm the girl down. He didn't want to make her cry. Wiping away her tears, the man spoke. Would she really prefer to become the old king's wife than to marry him? Hakan asked her. The girl replied that she wouldn't want that. It was just that she was very scared right now. Hakan tried to get into her position. He thought it must be scary for her to be separated from her family overnight, to go to another country and become the wife of the king of the Taiar people known as the barbarians. He calmed her down and told her that he would do nothing to her against her will. He went outside and told her to get a good night's rest and he would sleep outside tonight. The girl was left alone in the tent to her warriors who were warming themselves by the fire and talking. He said he would sleep outside tonight. The squad leader turned to the king. According to the customs of Brian, they were to have their first wedding night tonight. So they had pitched them a tent with a caustic smile, he said. But Hakan tried to justify this behavior of the girl. She was taken out by some strange people to an unknown place and now she has to spend the night with a strange man. Would such a sweet and fragile girl be able to endure such stress? To this, the warrior replied that His Majesty had said that they would bury all the Berg men in Medjugorje. Isn't this the person he originally wanted to get rid of? Why does he care about this woman and why does he care for her so much? The king replied that this Vane needs to control his speech. After all, this girl is now his wife. He even left all the castle inhabitants alive because when he looked at her, he remembered someone with a sad face, said Hakan. The girl who saved him lived not far from that castle. He thought about paying that child, so he let the Berg's men go. Though His Highness had become so good-natured, in any case, he had done a good job of getting a wife so suddenly. And in the morning when the girl woke up, she remembered that she had been crying and fell asleep without washing off her makeup. Her face must look terrible now. Looking out of the tent, she heard the sound of water. Probably there is a stream nearby. The girl thought she should go wash her face. As she washed her face, she realized that her red spots had gotten even worse. The girl thought that she shouldn't treat her red spots so that Hakan wouldn't touch her. That's what the girl thought. Suddenly, she heard some sound behind her back. When she turned around, she was grabbed by some people. Grabbing her arm, one man said that stealing her from the Taians was much easier than he thought. His partner warned him that they needed to go into the down woods so the dragons couldn't find them. They decided to go to the forest of Fuka. As they approached this forest, one of the men said that if, while passing through this forest, do not offer peanuts, the Fuka fairy would send rain. This was just to their advantage, for it would be even harder to find in the rain. Lucina, whom they had captured, was shaking from the cold. One of the kidnappers noticed this, and he assumed she was sick. If she doesn't survive until they hand her over to the Duchess, and I'll be paid. Turning her to face him, the kidnapper saw her spots on her face and thought that she had contracted the disease from the Taiars. They were about to leave her in this forest, but suddenly, if out of nowhere, an arrow flew out. That's when the Taiars showed up, rescuing their king's wife. After dealing with the kidnappers, Hakan turned to the girl. He noticed she was shaking and asked if she was okay. His face was covered in blood when they first met, but strangely enough, the girl was not afraid of him now, but felt safe. When he came to her, Hakan took her off the horse, untied her hands, and covered her with a cloak to keep her warm. Touching her forehead, he realized that the girl had fever. As soon as he noticed she was gone, he went in pursuit. Calming her down was Hakan. He apologized to her for being scared again. Taking her in his arms, he ordered his warriors to make a fire as soon as they came out of the forest so that the Lucina could dry off. Still need to get pure water to wash her face and find clothes to change into. The girl was happy that she didn't have to go back to Berg. She wanted to stay with this man. Sitting by the fire, the girl wiped the blood from her face. The fever had made the spots worse. She looked like a sick person. She could have cured those spots. But what stopped her was the fact that if she was beautiful, Hakan would want to sleep with her. But remembering how he treated her this morning, she thought that if they slept together, it wouldn't be a big deal. Just as she started to apply her magic, she suddenly heard a voice from behind her. He was telling her not to heal herself. Turning around, the girl saw the fairy of this forest. The girl leaned over and asked him, "Is this really the gnome who causes rain because he is not given peanuts?" To which he replied that he was not a gnome and tall enough for a forest fairy. He noticed that the girl was talking better than he thought. She had been quiet all day yesterday. He told her that this was the first time he had ever observed such energy in a Taiar. He realized that the girl had healing abilities. He began to explain to her not to use her healing abilities for nothing. If she was exposed, she would be in danger. It was a very valuable ability that everyone wanted to get their hands on. If the fact that this girl had the ability was exposed, people who wanted to steal it would flock like ants. The girl thanked the fairy for such valuable information. Exactly, she said that she would be very careful. The little fairy was very curious. If she spoke so well, then why is she so quiet? The girl said that because she was afraid she couldn't speak in front of everyone. If she speaks, people will get angry and hit her. That's why she so rarely says anything she wants to say, explained the Lucina to him. And since he is not human, she is no longer afraid of him and can talk to him normally. The girl told him the story of how 10 years ago she met a dragon. A very big and beautiful red dragon. Since his wing was damaged and bleeding, she used her healing ability to heal him. She wanted to talk to him, but she lost consciousness. Suddenly, they heard someone approaching their tent, so the fairy said goodbye to the girl and said they would see each other again. Going into the tent, Hakan said that they did not have a suitable size change of clothes. And when he saw the girl's face, he became very worried. He immediately called his healer, who immediately came to him. As soon as the doctor saw the spots on the face and the girl, he immediately took the prince as far away from the tent as possible. He said that the symptoms that the girl had were very similar to a very dangerous disease called smallpox. At this time, the girl came out of the tent and said that it was not smallpox, but the doctor would not even listen to her and ordered her to stay away from His Majesty because she might be contagious. The girl wanted to justify herself and say it wasn't contagious. She started to panic so much that she couldn't even speak. Hakan stopped at his subject and ordered him to lower his sword. They couldn't be sure it was smallpox. He heard the girl wanted to say something but was interrupted, so he turned to her and offered to tell her what she wanted. The girl said it was not a disease. Not long ago, she dyed her hair. It's sulfur and saffron juice. It's dye. The girl wanted to tell them. But the doctor was wary and didn't really believe her story. He thought the girl was just delirious with fever. The more nervous the girl got, the more she got confused. She remembered her stepmother beating her when she lived in the palace. Just a word was enough to get her beaten. The girl couldn't even talk about her situation properly. Since no one listened to her as a child, but on the contrary only humiliated her. While the girl was silent, the doctor approached the king. He wanted to prove to him that she had smallpox. They can't move her to the palace. He must burn everything she touched. Otherwise it will be dangerous for the Taiar. The warriors began to grow resentful of this girl's life. She realized that if she didn't say anything she could die. She wanted to heal herself, but remembered that the Russia of this forest had told her not to use her power in public. If she was exposed, she would be in danger. So what can she do? To heal herself or not?